let me invite Sona Datta to make the first presentation. This presentation is to set the context for the session, for a discussion by outlining the present gender energy issues and the policy developments.
Thank you, Nehru. Like Nehru said, the idea of this presentation is really to be at a bit at the meta level and sort of set the context of where we are in terms of gender and energy policy and practice in South Asia. And this is really a result of a gender review that was carried out a few years back as part of another ADB grant. So that's where it's coming from. We'll talk about that grant later in the afternoon when we have a whole session on it. I'm just going to focus on this particular aspect of the policy and practice. So, essentially, I'd like to really start with the gender area, what the gender scenario is, because that's really where the energy policies sit. And it's good to note that actually all South Asian countries have really good established frameworks for gender equality and women's rights. So we have all the institutional policies in place, we've signed the CEDAW, our constitution guarantees equal rights to women, our planned documents talk about the gender as a cross-cutting issue, which can sometimes be a bit of a problem because that's where it remains. We also have separate or joint ministries that are looking at gender perspectives. We have gender focal points in most of the ministries that are supposed to look at this as a specific issue. On the ground, however, the progress has been rather mixed. The region as a whole has made good progress in terms of primary education, in terms of basic health, in terms of women in parliaments in some cases. But if you look at certain other areas, maternal health is something that we're really lagging behind, and certain other areas that I'll focus on that have particular relevance to the energy sector. So the 2-3 areas that I want to talk a bit about is education, secondary education in particular, labor force, and specific issues in energy. And in all of these, you can see from this figure here that South Asia really lags behind from other development regions. Okay, so gender gap in literacy. There is the overall progress in terms of primary education has been commendable in the region, and some countries like Sri Lanka have done really well. But the gender gaps in literacy really begins at the middle age, not middle age, but it starts at the age of 10 when you're going to secondary school. And there are a whole lot of cultural reasons for it, which I don't need to go into. But this particularly, and the fact that the number of women in the science, technology, and engineering, math, the STEM, popularly called the STEM, is really low. That has serious implications for the energy sector because of employability. You know, we talk about employing women in the energy sector, but how do you employ them if they don't have the necessary qualifications at one level? Of course, there are different levels that we're talking about, so that does become a hindrance. The second area that I want to talk about briefly is where are the women in labor sector, in the labor force? And there are 3 points here that I want to highlight. Firstly, women as a whole are relatively lesser represented in the overall labor force, and you can see that from the graph over there. The second point I want to mention, and wherever that they are engaged, they are typically in tasks and jobs that are either informal or low wages, or typically both. And they're also very largely represented in the vulnerable employments. And by vulnerable, I don't necessarily mean the physical safety, but also type of job, contracts, reliability, safety, all of those factors. And if you see the graph on the right side, you can see in South Asia, the number of women who are working, out of that, all more than 80% are actually in those sorts of jobs, which is a fairly worrying symptom. Yes, please. Okay. So what does this really mean for the energy sector? One point that we've been talking at length since morning is the whole dependence on biomass, and that we've not really made progress in terms of clean cooking at all. Either in terms of transition to LPG and other what is called blend, the biogas, LPG, electricity and natural gas, the best sort of fuels available. But even in terms of graduating to clean cooking fuels, like improved cook stoves, briquettes and all of that, the progress has been less than the population growth. And I think we don't really need to go into the impacts on women and the disproportionate impact that it has on women and children There's whole issue of pollution, indoor air pollution, time spent on all of these. But there's also the whole opportunity cost of this time that is going into this. And in terms of opportunity cost, I don't really want to talk only about income generation. That's one of the things that you could do with spare time. But anybody from South Asia knows that most women have a working hour of 16 to 18 hours. Even to be able to release that time by introducing some improved energy sources would really be a great thing, even if it is used for leisure or self-improvement. The National Development Goals and policies do highlight inclusive development. They do talk about women, like I said, in national plans, in Mahinda Chintana in Sri Lanka, in the national policy plans in Nepal, in all of them. So that's a great opportunity for people who want to work on gender and who want to address these issues. However, by the time it comes to energy sector policies and programs, there's some amount of policy evaporation that's happening. And in most energy programs and policies, you see it only in terms of achievements, in terms of so many the best scenario is access. So many number of people reached, but mostly it's not even in terms of services, it's in terms of megawatts generated and so on, which to my mind should really be the first point of access. So at best, you see the energy sector policies and programs talking about people. It's sort of assumed that women would fall in this people or communities and that sort of thing. Two policies, regional policies that stand out for their attention to gender is one was the India Integrated Energy Policy 2006, I think, and the second was the Nepal's Rural Energy Policies, both of which do recognize women's time poverty issues, but they also recognize higher order issues of productivity and so on. Both of them are being revised right now, and I hope that emphasis remains. So then what are the key issues? That is the policy situation. The main issue is that, like I said, there's an overall gender disparity in society, which affects everything, which also affects how women and men are able to benefit from energy services. An energy program that assumes family or household as a unit, or which doesn't take a gender perspective, will always remain substandard in terms of reaching women in particular, because women are just not able to access benefits from an energy program at the same level that men do. And this is for a variety of reasons: access to banking, access to productive resources, access to land, ownership, and so on. There is also a lack of, the second point is women's unrecognized involvement in the non-commercial sectors. When it is not recognized, what is not there recognized is not captured, what is not captured is not tracked, what is not tracked doesn't matter. So essentially, when it's not part of, when all the drudgerous, time-consuming tasks that women are forced to carry out, when they don't feature into national income accounts, then obviously the focus is going to be less. Energy services, like I said before, if you club it all in a household, the energy services that reach in a household, I mean, oftentimes we find it difficult to convince energy sector people or policy makers that women have different needs. It's really a question of emphasis. So what do women need energy for? Some of these aspects were dealt with were touched upon in the morning. There was safety issue. There's also the whole lot of drudgerous tasks that women carry out, which can be eased if there was energy available, good energy available. This is things like water lifting. If you compare the resources going into irrigation versus resources going into energization of drinking water, essentially getting into drinking water to women's doorstep, then you see a discrepancy there. You see an imbalance there. 1 minute, right. Powering wells, labor-saving technologies, the informal enterprises that women run, all of these need attention and they need better energy services. So, okay, we think that we need intervention at two areas. The first is that we need to have interventions or energy services in terms of services and not in terms of, not only in terms of kilowatts and megawatts. What is that energy service able to do for people? So many people getting access to better water, closer home, time saved. These are the social indicators. I think we need to build them in and into programming itself. Like I said, what is not tracked doesn't matter. So it has to be in those terms. Productive uses of energy. There was some discussion on it earlier. Women are engaged in a lot of low-value activities, low-value productive activities, and one of the reasons for this low value is the quality of energy service they have. So there's a huge possibility of improvement there, whether it's agriculture, whether it's post-agriculture processing, whether it's horticulture, gardening, all of those issues where women predominate, energy service is a huge issue. We also need to be able to target when we have electrification programs, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in the JPR session, that when we have electrification programs, there is a need to target and educate both men and women in all the social mediation processes that go along with rural electrification. And, yeah, oh, right, okay. So, yes, and finally, I want to just say that there is a need to build in and gender into the ongoing processes of we need to have, like I said, indicators and targets that are linked to use of energy services instead of just the supply side. So we need to be able to track participation and benefits to women and disadvantaged groups. Oftentimes in programming documents, you see that women's issues are identified, but they kind of remain in the baseline situation description. You know, that's where it remains. It hardly ever graduates into an indicator, into a concrete indicator that will actually measure the use and benefit, and even less in terms of program objective itself, where you're talking about women, men, children, and their specific energy needs. So that really needs to feature, I think, very strongly in all our programming. I do think that what we said earlier, that women can play a very strong role in last mile functions, in electrification. Well, and they are playing. We do have examples from Orissa, from Uttarakhand, and several other places in India and other countries where women are playing a role in meter reading, in spreading awareness on electricity, on use of electricity, using electricity for productive uses, and so on. So we really need to strengthen that last mile in electrification, which can really improve the effectiveness of electrification programs as a whole.
Thank you. Let's move on now to Priyanka Vijayatunga, who will speak on South Asia tariff regulations, lessons for inclusive access. This is based on ADB's recent cross-country experience and will elaborate on the categorization of below poverty line and disadvantaged customers, such as domestic, small, agriculture, commercial, small, including gender, and measures to engage them in electrification. It will also share findings on how subsidies and the pricing mechanism can be targeted to better focus on below poverty line women and disadvantaged groups.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nalu. I'm not sure whether I'll be covering all those areas, but at least I'll try my best to give a glimpse of some of those aspects, and then I hope other panelists will be able to cover most of the rest. In this particular presentation, I'm going to provide a few of the, I must say, insights into tariff regulation side and the lessons for inclusive access, which is the result of one of the studies which ADB carried out with the help of people like Dr. Simala PDS and Mudita and his team. So let me proceed quickly to save time. Next one, please. I don't have to go into details. One bullet point which I would like to emphasize is that the access to energy is not there for two different reasons. One is, of course, because the service is not available at the doorstep. That's one reason. The second is, of course, they cannot afford it. So when we try to look at provision of energy, we have to look at both these together. When it comes to affordability, I'm looking at here only the power sector, not other subsectors of energy. When it comes to affordability, we have to look at the initial cost of connection and then, of course, the recurrent cost associated with the use of electricity over time. So these are different areas where we need to look at if you're looking at inclusive access to energy. Next one, please. Yes, if you look at South Asian countries, I'm basically presenting the information which we have got for South Asia. If you look at South Asia, all of the South Asia has regulators in place. They set this consumer tariff. But if you look at the independents, hardly most of them have no complete independence to set tariffs when it comes to setting tariffs, the final tariffs. And in most cases, no truly cost-reflective tariff. There are subsidies all over, gross subsidies and cross subsidies. And if you look at the subsidy, the tariffs in South Asia, in also many of our DMCs, you can see the government use electricity to create an enabling environment to encourage investment in certain class of consumers for various reasons, because of national policies and so on. And also almost all these countries, you see a provision of relief to low-income customers in the tariff structures. I do not want to go into details of these numbers, but you can see the domestic tariffs in all these countries are is a block tariff, and the smallest block, you can see all of them are subsidized in all these countries. So you see the low-income consumers are always subsidized. And the subsidies in the region range from 100% subsidy in places like Bhutan for the rural consumers to about 41% in Madhya Pradesh. So subsidies stand somewhere in between in all these countries between 100% and 41%, depending on the type of customer you are looking at. In almost all cases, commercial consumers cross-subsidizes the other sectors. And industries and agriculture receive subsidies in majority of the countries. So these are various areas where you need to keep in mind when you really think of inclusive access, if you want to really provide a tariff structure regulation to encourage inclusive access. Next one, please. Issues what we have when it comes to tariff setting. One problem is actually identification of groups to be subsidized. The poor, therefore naturally the subsidies are not targeted. If you want to target it, you need to be able to really identify the groups which you need to target. That's not easy. And the exact subsidies to each of those consumer categories, even though we are looking at the subsidies as a whole and 100%, 41% and so on, if you have to look at it, they are not really exactly calculated. So that's something which is absent in tariff setting. And most of the time, subsidy commitments are not honored, unless, of course, cross-subsidy you don't have to worry, but when it comes to gross subsidies coming from the governments, most of the time they are not honored. So electricity utilities continue to run on debt, non-cost reflective tariffs, and they are running into long-running debts in the region. That's one of the biggest problems we have in the region. Next one, please. Inclusive access prerequisites, as I said, one thing, the lines, the service lines, whether it's decentralized systems or whether it's centralized systems, will have to come to this, the underprivileged groups. That's number one. Number two, we need to address the affordability issue. Now, if you look at some of these houses, they don't have even financing for house wiring and the connection costs, and then the recurrent cost naturally to use electricity. So all these are areas when it comes to affordability you need to look at. Even if you can pay for electricity, you may not be able to pay for your house connections, because that comes quite difficult for these poor households. Next one, please. Lessons need to support initial costs. Obviously, that's the lesson which is almost obvious to everybody here. And then subsidized tariffs to cover recurrent costs. We need to continue subsidies if you are looking at inclusive access. Required to identify and establish groups needing subsidies. That's very important. The targeting, which is not an easy thing to do, as in the case of many other subsectors in the economy where you need subsidies. Electricity for livelihood development is something where probably we can easily bring in inclusiveness, because if you can target livelihood activities, the subsectors where women participation or inclusive access, the groups needing support are really active, that is an area where probably you can target, like agriculture, cottage industries, and certain small-scale commercial activities. Next one, please. Inclusive access lessons, support with gender consideration. Naturally, we can target women-headed households. That's possible, again, looking at certain geographical areas or certain activities where you think that women-headed households are majority, then that's an area where you can target. I think some of the interventions in Nepal, probably we have similar interventions. I'm sure my Nepal colleagues will bring them in during the panel discussions. Then things like enterprises with dominant involvement of women, cottage industries. Wherever you have dominant involvement of women, you can bring them some level of tariff considerations into those groups. Those can be easily targeted. And you see similar attempts in some countries. In fact, I quoted Maldives here. The attempts are not yet there, and we were trying to think of these interventions in Maldives as part of one of our projects, and I'm sure Ajwat can elaborate on that. And in Tamil Nadu, you see some of these interventions. I think these need to be expanded if you really want to bring in inclusiveness into tariff formulation. Next one, please. Final remarks, as I said, subsidy is required for increased inclusive access, and that's something which we need to remember. But at the same time, we have to keep in mind the utilities are pressurized to make sure that they will have enough revenue to recover their costs. So this is something which is kind of in conflict with each other, which means the gross subsidy will have to come from the government, and the rough subsidy commitments will have to be met in time. Otherwise, we will have another issue of making these utilities survive, sustainability of utilities. And then need to carefully target them. We need to find ways and means of targeting them. In this regard, the region needs extensive capacity development, particularly in the regulators. Regulators are the ones who make tariffs, but they should be very well made aware of how to do these things, and particularly on the tariff structures, level of tariffs, and how to target these subsidies. That's very important. I don't think that's really there in most of the regulators in the region. With that note, I conclude. Thank you.
Now with that, let's move on to our moderated dialogue, where we have 5 panelists here. And what I'm going to do is to pose a question to each one of them and invite a response. So let's start with my immediate neighbor, Siddiq Zubair from Bangladesh. And as I said before, these questions are probably, you can speak for much longer than 5 minutes, but let's hope you will try and manage to pack in as much information as possible into 5 minutes. Right. Now, Bangladesh is one of the fastest growing markets for off-grid solar technologies. And civil society and NGOs have had a significant role in this. Can you tell us, can you explain to us, what has been the role of women and their organizations in this expansion?
Let me first clarify a few issues in this context. First of all, I don't like to see the gender issues of the women as or to confine my discussion only with this narrow space. Rather than I want to see it and evaluate it in a macro level perspective. Because I believe that the potentiality to the women is huge. So it is, I don't want to undermine this. So if you see for Bangladesh, in context of Bangladesh, if you see that ILO said that Bangladesh is the 8th lowest country where the ratio between the women and men in the politics is in 8th position. So this is a good thing because the after independence, if you see, the most of the time the government is headed by the women in Bangladesh, in most of the time, and still now. And if you see also that there are a couple of government policies where women-centered policies, where we put a lot of emphasis for women development or gender equality. So with this background, if we see that Shoma already identified that in this sub-region, most of the country has the constitutional provision for this gender equality. There is a ministry everywhere, as in Bangladesh also. But if we see the sectoral, because when we say something development is not the individually in a very specific particular sector. Development is a holistic. If we call the economic development, then it includes everything. It is development in education, development in health, development in mother and child mortalities and all those things. And if you see, the Bangladesh has a remarkable achievement in Soma said that in the mortalities there is less attendant, but exception is Bangladesh because we have achieved a lot. It is above the LDG's target. So we have very specific. Now if I come down and narrow down to my focus is off-grid electrification, that off-grid electrification in Bangladesh is mainly done through the solar solutions, and government is facilitating these activities through the private sector, and again with the IDCOM, Infrastructure Development Company Limited, which is a 100% government-owned financial institutions. IDCOM representative is with us, with our delegations, and she will say much more about this. But what I said that these off-grid electricity development activities has not that much of focus for gender or the females to integrate, but it is not less also, because IDCOL program always put an importance to engage the women for selecting the place where that solar system should be placed, where the light should be placed, because they are the users in a family who will take the most benefit from that. It is for the lighting, it is for the production. And one study showed that the income level of the women in those who own the solar home system is double than the income of the other women. And this is the study we found. And also there are a couple of the partnering organizations or the participating organizations who are working with the IDCOL in this program. They have a very specific program on it, like the Gramin Shakti. Gramin Shakti, the chief of this Gramin Shakti is with us. They have a separate program to train the village women to take care of manufacturing and maintaining the solar system, which includes the solar system means charge controller. And also he also mentioned that they are also engaged to collect the bills and all those things. But they are also engaging in the techniques. They also train the women to repair the electrical appliances like the mobile phones. These are the small things, solar lanterns. So there is a specific program. And apart from that, there are at least I can name 3 organizations which are headed by the out of 47, headed by the women. And they are very encouraging on it. So, and the IDCOL study, the study conducted by the BITS, which is a renowned think tank in our country, they showed that the involvement of women in decision making is more in the household where they process the household solar systems. So this is a total change in the social structure where the females are contributing to take the major decisions even, which is really absent in our society in previous. So there is a value chain through this solar system or the off-grid electricity system, which includes the mini-grid, microgrid, these also. And also mentioned that there is a solar irrigation system we introduced, and we are hopeful that that could be the next remarkable achievement we can target it through this solar irrigation system after the solar home system. So these are the issues that how the off-grid electrification has bring lot of changes in the rural social structure, where women are coming up with their voices, where they are participating in the decision making and also contributing by raising their incomes in the society, and they are taking their status in the society. So if I cannot point out specifically that these are the issues where women are, but this is the issues that if you consider in a holistic manner, then they are coming up. And there is a specific role of this off-grid electrification to bring these changes there. Thank you.
To Ajwad Mustafa, who is the Permanent Secretary in the Ministry of Environment and Energy. Now, the Maldives has been implementing the ADB-supported project called Preparing Outer Islands for Sustainable Energy Development. And this project has a gender action framework. And one of the activities is on off-peak tariff rates for women's small and medium enterprises. Can you tell us something about the gender-focused activities that are being implemented as part of this project?
Thank you. First of all, let me thank ADB for giving me this opportunity to speak with such eminent persons. Well, the question about how the projects that have been implemented in the energy sector, how the gender context is being addressed. Well, as you have said, through the assistance of ADB, we are implementing a program called, it is called POISE. It's called preparing outer islands for renewable energy development. Well, the idea is, because if you look at how the power sector has evolved in the Maldives, then you will understand why the name came about. Because initially, the power sector itself was developed, is very much a community-driven concept. Because our islands are very small, as you all know, about some islands we have about 1,000 or 2,000 people living. So it is impossible for the central government from the capital to provide these infrastructures for all the islands. When you have about 1,200 odd islands, it is impossible. So initially, it was very much community-driven. You know, the island communities formed groups which involves women as well, and they sort of raise finances with the assistance of the government. You know, they build the power. I wouldn't call it infrastructure. It's just a very basic setup. Now these things have evolved over time, and now the country has very much progressed. But when we look back and when we try to sort of go to the next stage, you know, whereby we convert these islands, because Maldives is theoretically an ideal destination for solar photovoltaics. You know, we don't need to rely so much on imported fossil fuel, which at the moment about 20% of our GDP is spent on importing fossil fuel, and we have the highest retail electricity tariffs in the region. So this need not be the case, you know, because we can easily convert our islands into using renewables, and we can have affordable, reliable electricity to the community. But because these islands are not sort of ready for renewable energy penetration, because we need to rehabilitate the existing grids, we need to rehabilitate the powerhouses, you know, so that the systems are ready for power to be injected from an intermittent source like solar or any other renewable source. Hence, the preparing outer islands for renewable energy development came about. And so under this project, again, as I said, when it all started, it was a community-driven process. But now we need to go back again, revisit the whole thing, because now when we look at the islands, that we have utility setups. You know, we have government-owned utility companies providing these services to the islands. It's no longer a community-driven thing. Thereby there is a disconnect with the island community. Once it is commercialized, it is very much utility-based service. there's no day-to-day interaction with island communities. So this is something we need to address. So in terms of developing this project with ADB, one of the fundamental principles that we are following is community consultation. Whatever we do, our teams, our project management staff, and the ministry staff visit all the islands. By the way, our target is to convert all inhabited islands by 2018. 30% of their daytime peak would have to be met by solar photovoltaics. Well, this is a very ambitious target, and unfortunately, the issue of finance is no longer. I mean, we have secured funds to address this problem, but the challenge is, the power systems are not ready. Community acceptance is something we have to work on, and how we, the savings that we achieve by going for solar, how we sort of transfer this saving to the community level, So again, the challenge for us is, as I said, utility companies provide these services in islands. The moment we allow individual businesses, homeowners to install solar photovoltaics on their roof and start generate their own power, then again, the utilities cannot survive because they lose income source. So, the challenge for us, the whole concept for us in terms of developing the project is as a public sector investment. We will, through the project, we install solar panels on the rooftops of all available public buildings, up to 30% of that, and the electricity is fed directly into the grid. And because of that, there is a fuel saving from the power generation side. We are no longer consuming so much fuel as we were using before. So how do we translate this fuel saving into end users? How do we transfer this cost saving? One idea is to have some sort of off-peak tariff. Again, the problem for us now is, those island communities, committees, corporate societies, those concepts are no longer there. People are very much individualistic. There's no island spirit there. So we have to somehow advocate and lobby to island, especially the women groups, to form groups or committees or corporate societies whereby they start some form of business, and we will, through the savings that we get from the project, we can somehow give them an off-peak reduced tariff and so forth. And that is one idea we have. The other option is to give opportunities to women as much as possible. Unfortunately, in our communities, women don't tend to go for technical jobs like electricians or engineers. They don't prefer that. So, but they do administrative jobs. So, one of the conditions that we are going to put up is sort of almost 20 to 30% of employments that are created has to be women. So thereby we have sort of balanced opportunities for both men and women. With that, I will conclude. But again, I'd like to thank ADB for inviting me, as well as for giving us these sort of opportunities for countries like us to progress and to develop our energy sector. Thank you very much.
To Nepal, to Chaya Jha, who was the consultant for the ADB and World Bank country study. Now the question I have for you relates to the study that was recently done. And let me ask the question, from your gender and social inclusion review of the energy sector, what would you say are the main bottlenecks and opportunities to engaging women and socially marginalized groups in the energy sector, particularly in roles that go beyond or which are other than as users of energy services?
Thank you so much. I join my appreciation, to add my appreciation to everyone's since the morning who has been saying it, who have been appreciating this opportunity to participate and to learn from this gathering. To come to the question, the study that you mentioned is still ongoing. I would also like to draw on my other experiences of review in the sector. So what Soma presented, that there is the overall socio-economic political context affects the energy sector. That is very true for the women and for the excluded social groups in Nepal. Social exclusion has been a part of the discourse in Nepal for the last 10 years now. It's been part of the government documents, and there are certain people from different social profiles, like the Dalits, or people from different ethnic groups, or people in remote areas, people who have lower income status, or people from the plains, Muslims, who have multiple dimensions of multiple issues which discriminate or hamper them, constrain them from accessing benefits of the sector, of different sectors, including of the energy sector. And of course, women experience these, they're far more vulnerable, and they experience this. And if the diversity within women also we need to keep in mind, and we have found that many of the women who are from these different socially excluded groups experience these vulnerabilities more. Coming specifically to the energy sector, a key issue has been the aspect that land is not in women's names. So especially if it's a hydropower project or generation kind of a project, then because the papers are in men's names, and those who are landless are many times from the social groups which are excluded, they are unable to participate in the processes of the program design or in the discussions or the consultations that happen. The compensation money that is given, it comes into the family, and as was explained, as a household unit, the gender inequalities within the household is not considered. So when we do FGDs at the community level with women or with other women of different social groups, they will say, yes, money came in, there was some discussion at home, but we've not seen the money. So the kind of joint understanding of how to use that money, those kind of things don't happen. Also, if I look at a generation project, the pre-construction stage, there are so many different kinds of studies done. And what we found that if I link it to the first session point, that what Sheila was saying, that women, and I would add men of different socially excluded groups, are considered agents of change. That understanding, that mindset, that they need to be positioned as actors, as agents of change, I don't think it has come in, because many of those studies are done on the basis, it's extremely technical, very, very engineering focused, hydrological study, sedimentation study, topographical study, but that understanding the people living there have knowledge. They would know where the sedimentation happens. They may have the experience of what has to be done. That is sometimes not as strong as it should be. There are, of course, the opportunities now, because the environmental assessment studies, the social assessment studies are done. But by the time these are done, a lot of the processes have already happened. And the project design has many times moved forward. The cost estimates have moved forward. So these become bottlenecks for bringing in the expertise, the knowledge, and the kind of activities required for the program to ensure that these groups get the benefit from the project as much as possible. Information, etc. And there's the point that was just made that women in Maldives sometimes do not prefer those kind of jobs. It's also linked to socialization. There are certain areas, there are certain sectors which are considered, this is not easy, this is not for women. This is more for men. This is not, and in Nepal, this is not for maybe people from excluded social groups or whatever. And that also hampers, that's also a bottleneck. Because the skills required in the pre-construction stage, that you need to invest in building the skills so that during the construction, the post-construction stage, you can use that group can benefit from that. That does not happen. That is not planned for. Another point is that many of the people from the ethnic nationalities in Nepal are the ones first affected by these projects because they are the ones very near the source of energy. So livelihoods is the first thing that gets affected. And many projects do keep this in mind and they plan for that, the resettlement, the displacement and all of that. But within the ethnic nationalities, the gender dimensions sometimes are not kept in mind. And so when the livelihoods get affected or when other resources are affected, how does it impact the different household members? That is something that we need to better plan for. Also the skills and the competencies of the team, of the team who's fielded. I think there is an assumption, I go back to what Soma was, there's an assumption that when you mention gender, when you mention community, these issues will get addressed. But all of us, it's such a good opportunity, there are all of us working on, we are talking to the converted, right? So we know that that is not true. And the skills, the expertise, that investment that is necessary within the institutions, like for example in Nepal, the Nepal Electricity Authority, the Alternative the Energy Promotion Center, the people there, gradually there has been an understanding, an increased understanding, and that's an opportunity. But the tools, the application of all this into real work, those skills, that capacity building has to still happen, I feel, and there is work going on. In fact, NEA has recently established a JESI section, which hopefully will now pick up and build the capacities and all of that. In renewable energy also, I would like, the last point that I would like to make, and of course we can speak on and on about this, is again linked to what Rajan was saying in the morning, that it should be demand driven. Absolutely, that's the way to go. But in renewable energy, what my experience was in Nepal was the voiceless, the people who are most marginalized, there needs to be a social mobilization component because they just did not know how to place the demand. And that in itself ousts them. They are unable to come into the process at all. And of course, all these family and community-based patriarchal norms hamper women, and caste, ethnicity, language, location-based norms hamper access to different resources like subsidies and whatever other policies, very positive policy environment that Nepal has. The energy sector is gradually getting that policy framework now. A big opportunity is the huge levels of awareness that women have now, and different social groups, identity-based groups. There are many, many self-help groups in Nepal. And again, what was mentioned in the morning, that different kinds of partnerships with alternative stakeholders. That is what we require. Saving and credit groups are innumerable. But I don't think as yet the documents or the planning has been able to exploit that. That you have to partner with them and bring them there, bring the NGOs and the CBOs working on these issues to bring in that lens into the work that we do. So, of course, there are bottlenecks, but there are opportunities, and we need to do still a lot of work, even though there has been some progress.
Let's now move to Jyoti Pari, the Executive Director of IRADE. And I think we will now shift a little from a national dimension, a national perspective, again back to a more sub-regional and a South Asian focus. And my question to you, what kind of innovative policies and solutions are needed to ensure large-scale impact in energy access for women and socially marginalized groups in South Asia?
Thank you very much. We have been hearing So thanks. We heard Soma saying that there is a problem of staggering figure of 2.9 billion people not having access to cooking energy, At the same time, labor participation rate is very low, and literacy rate is very low, and these are somewhat connected. There is a lot of unproductive hours going into collecting fuels and cooking fuels especially, and that may be the key issue that we have to solve. On the other hand, we also hear Priyantha saying that subsidy burden is very large, and perhaps if these people were doing productive work, they would not need subsidized energy. So in some sense, we have a vicious circle where we are stuck with people spending unproductive hours and then not being able to afford things. So we need to get out of this through some innovations, some policy innovations, technical innovations, and address some of these issues directly. Now, if you say that 2.9 billion don't have cooking fuels and 1.4 billion don't have, or 3 billion, whatever is the latest number, don't have electricity, then the remaining people at least have an energy source in their house, which may be electricity. Now, you need to address the cooking fuels in it's so big that you need many solutions, and you will need LPG, biogas, piped natural gas, solar, and let us add to that electric cooking also, because that would build up the load in the system, and it will also help the utilities in planning properly. Now, we have been doing some surveys also in peri-urban areas and towns and so on, where we find that those who do not have access to energy actually pay twice as much, sometimes, and even more so per megajoule of useful energy. So we need to connect these dots and see how we can get out of these situations, because as it is, poor pay for it, whether it is through their time, whether it is through their hard-earned cash or whatever. So, but it so happens that this is the right time to strike on this problem. We have right now oil prices at the lowest, at $30 to $50 a barrel. You will not believe, but in India we have 50,000 megawatts of surplus power. People have to, since electricity cannot be stored, it has to be backed down, and power plants are being backed down, sometimes as much as 100,000 megawatts. So, plant load factors of the plants are falling, and it leads to low utility factor and losses to the utilities, utilization factor, and so on. Let us think of also electric cooking, where you can, I know it is not simple, many of these connected households, especially if they are off-grid solutions or so, they are single-phase connections, and all some of them do is light 2 lights and 1 fan. So it is not possible to do anything more than that with them, but gradually it is possible, at least in the start reducing the problem from the peri-urban and move on to the other side. When you're talking about big pyramids, and we want to help the people at the bottom of the pyramid has to be a reasonable size, but when it is 2.9 billion people, you do have to remove people from the top, so that the bottom pyramid gets chance to breathe, and some solutions can emerge, because no amount of financing solutions can be done for 50% of the people, 90% of the people on a subsidy basis. So it's possible for those people who are paying twice as much, at least let them have proper connections, even LPG connections. We found that people have, some of them have formal connections, some of them have informal connections, and right now there is no dearth of LPG, so government is moving very fast. Luckily, the government is also has very good policies in place. First of all, they want to do the cross-border trade, so South Asia, connections are being thought about, so that huge amount of hydropower in Nepal, in Bhutan, and to some extent Pakistan. And there's a lot of synergy between the countries in terms of different kinds of holiday, Friday and Sunday, and so on. So we can exchange power and come up with these solutions. And my organization, Irade, is working. We have a large project with USAID where we are working on this issue of cross-border power trade, and Priyanta is a member of our council. So that we are, and we found that Bhutan, which we began to trade power way back almost 15 to 20 years ago, has also done this type of thing, and now 90% the houses are reached with electricity there, and even more so, and they are using some of these. So I would suggest that we need a multi-stakeholder program where induction cooker or rice cooker makers and utilities and think tanks, NGOs, and some financiers can come together and let us see, sort out, thresh out lots of problems. I'm not saying it can be done in over a year, but certainly it's a path that needs to be examined, and see how we can make some dent in cooking energy that has been dogging us for decades and will keep dogging us for decades. If SDG 7 is to be reached by 2030, we have to put cooking fuels in 25 million households every year. So we hope that something is done in this area. Thank you.
I think you've touched on a dimension which is, I think, very relevant to everybody, and of course to women in particular, and maximizing the use of surplus power, to benefit the poor and marginalized, and particularly women. And I think cooking is something we take for granted, and we don't realize the different dimensions to it, and energy being one of them. So I think the point that you brought forth to this audience is really important in that sense. Let's move to Tilak Siambalapitiya, who is Managing Director of Resource Management Associates in Sri Lanka. Now, again, this is also looking at a sort of more South Asian perspective. Some states in India, such as Tamil Nadu, have zero charges for handloom weavers, which is an industry where women tend to predominate. Now, can you explain to us if this example can be replicated or adapted in other countries in the region? Just as much as there's the Maldives Poise project. And can this contribute to developing local economies through women's productive energy use? Another question added to that: is this an entry point for gender mainstreaming in the ADB portfolio in relation to tariff policies and mechanisms? So rather into a bundle of questions there, and you are our final speaker.
Thank you, Nelu. And thanks for the opportunity to share this information coming out of a regional study on electricity pricing policies and regulatory status of various utilities in the region. So what Priyanta presented was a summary of our study. The study itself, it's almost at its end, although it's still not published. So what Nelu said is something that we stumbled upon when we were going through the literature available on electricity pricing policies, rather electricity price structures in various utilities in the region. The study covered 6 states of India and the 5 countries, Bangladesh, Bhutan, Nepal, Maldives and Sri Lanka. So in total, effectively 11 entities and utilities. So we looked at the regulatory status, the cost of supply of each of these utilities in these states or countries, and also the subsidies and cross-subsidies that are active in these countries and states, and how much is the magnitude of subsidies to each identified customer sectors, and then trying to figure out, are there any gender specific initiatives in these countries. And in fact, out of all these, the only thing we stumbled upon is this subsidy to power looms as well as handloom owners in Tamil Nadu. So Tamil Nadu provides 50 kilowatt hour zero cost electricity per month to any household that has a handloom activity. Handloom does not use power, but I'm sure the availability of electricity allows them to work for longer hours and under somewhat better conditions, and the industry being dominated by women. They did not stop at that. They provided 500 kilowatt hours per month for power looms free of charge. So that's where Tamil Nadu is when it comes to supporting the cottage and rural industries. Whereas, of course, all over India, water pumping for agricultural use is either free or a quota is given free or heavily subsidized. And of course, as we all know, in all the countries in the region, electricity for low user households is enjoying a subsidy. So Devon, you are right, this can be considered an entry point. But on the other hand, what the regulators would be asking and what the utilities would be asking is, who is going to pay this subsidy? So this question will come over and over again. So in our study, what we come across is that yes, there are subsidies, and particularly in Indian utilities, the subsidy recovery mechanism is relatively good and transparent. Of course, I have certain comments on how the value of the subsidy is calculated, but nevertheless, there is always what the accountants call the truing up. So there's an ex ante assessment of the subsidy requirement and an ex post calculation, and the utility is allowed to pass on the subsidy, any gap in the subsidy, to customers in the subsequent years. But whereas in fact almost all the other countries, there is no truing up as such. So if the subsidy increases or decreases, finally at the end of the day it appears as a loss to the utility. Except in Sri Lanka, where the adjustment is announced, but the government never pays. Government never pays. So finally, after several years, the utility, it appears as a loss to the utility. So whatever we do, unless we do it with a clear definition of what the subsidies are and how they are going to be financed, unless we do that, these subsidies are going to be resisted by the utilities. And for good reasons, because a couple of years later, the same government who wanted subsidies will turn on them and ask, why are you making losses? So this is one of the things that we have to be very careful in promoting subsidies, as long as we can clearly define them and work out how to finance them. Then secondly, another thing that is coming out of our study, of course we knew this situation was there. There are subsidies already, but we do not know how well they are targeted. There are indices that economists have defined to how to calculate the subsidy beneficiary incidence. And when we look at these incidents, in fact, I could calculate it only for Sri Lanka because we have good information on Sri Lanka. We found that out of the amount of subsidy that is targeted for the households, it's only a small share that actually goes to the low user households. So, and the larger share goes to the middle user households. So we need to target the subsidies much better than we do now. But then the question comes in, how do you improve targeting? The present approach of all utilities and the governments in the region is to base it on the consumption. So which means a low user is considered to be a low income customer. Now we might question whether that is right. So maybe a low user is not a low income customer. A high user may be simply having 10 people in the family. So that's why he is a high user, but he is still a low income customer. So one could say, why not define the subsidy on a per capita basis? Then the question comes in, a census has to be done once in a few years by the utility in the households to find the entitlement. Then more paperwork and disputes. So we need to strike a balance between the amount of additional administrative work that one has to do in trying to improve the targeting. So as you see, there's a host of issues when you try to subsidize electricity, of course, as they do, for example, in Singapore, is to say electricity costs so much at this voltage, purchase it if you like, cut down if you do not want. Of course, I don't think we can follow those strict economic principles, but we can get closer there, provided we work out, as I said, how electricity is going to be subsidized, who is going to pay for it, and how it is going to be targeted. And if then the utilities, I'm sure, will support and assist in the implementation. Thank you.
Let's invite questions or comments from the floor. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Anurag. I work with SEVA. We are trying to do solar pumps in a number of areas, and we find that subsidies from for solar pumps for irrigation create an expectation that everybody will get a subsidy. Now, when we do it for salt pumps, the expectation is the same, but there is no subsidy for salt pumps. So, subsidies should be there to start the initiative. For how long should they be there? Is there a study by ADB? Are subsidies helping up to a point, and after that are they hurting? Is there a study with ADB on that? And are subsidies only on inputs, or should subsidies also move towards output? So today, subsidies are on input, on equipment. What is the quality of equipment that is installed? How long they are running? Rajasthan has done 10,000 solar pumps. How many of them are running? We all know that. Now, should we move to output-based subsidy? Thank you.
Let's take, please.
Thank you very much. My query goes to Soma. Actually, I also reviewed some energy policy documents. There are very, few to address regarding the JCs. And as far as, say, access to finance is concerned, it's very minimal. So that has to be addressed in the, say, energy policies also. That's one thing. Another thing is that my query also goes to Mr. Priyanta, that he said that there should be 100% subsidy in this energy sector. So my view is that does it work that if we provide 100% subsidy, because in our experiences, past experiences, actually it has not worked that much, because if there is 100% subsidy, the clients, the users, they are not that much responsible. For instance, in Nepal, there is a 100% subsidy for improved water mill with electrification, you see. And another case is that some 50% subsidy and 50% loan. So when we compare these two projects, in 100% subsidy, there is no any initiations, from the users. But as far as another user which has taken some loan, they are more responsible. Actually, how it has to be used, So we can see that clear differentiation between the 100% subsidy and the partial subsidy. My point, I want to just make some points that subsidy should be replaced by the credit. You see, once the client users, they get the credit, they have to explore some of the business, to promote by themselves. So my concern is that instead of subsidy, that should be replaced with the credit. Another thing is that we say that for doing everything, finance is very much critical. And as far as credit is concerned, microfinance institutions, they are charging about, on an average, 22%. So what I want to suggest that government says that yes, you have to support to the women, you have to provide credit to the women, but there is no any support from the government. So for clients, for the interest, at least they should give some, the nominal interest, the funds to the microfinance institutions, so that the microfinance can provide the credit to the women in low interest rate. That's my point. Thank you very much.
Thank you. First question.
I'm not sure whether I should be answering the first question. I think basically you were suggesting output-based subsidies, correct? I've not studied that, but certainly that's a good way of thinking about it in granting subsidies rather than providing an input. Certainly yes. So then there could be certain check on the leakages. Saying the Tamil Nadu example, we do not know that the handloom may be working today, for 1 month it may not be working, but still the subsidy comes in. But then checking the output means more paperwork.
I know in Nepal there was a performance-based subsidy on micro-hydro systems. So the subsidy that went to the manufacturers actually went to them after a few months or a few years of, it was a staggered thing which went after a few years. And as far as I know, that worked pretty well. I think it was also there in Sri Lanka in the RED days. You probably know how it performed.
Actually, from the supply side, we have been having output-based subsidies for some time, particularly on decentralized systems. And also, if you look at the Nepal loans, actually the recently approved loan, I think we have kind of output-based subsidy in a way, because we had some co-financing grants. And the grants are to be dispersed depending on certain outputs, like how many households are to be connected to the grid. Once the connections are established, then you get your money. The utility gets the money. So that's in some form or the other, they are there in the output-based subsidies. In the context of providing 100% subsidy, probably my message was conveyed wrongly. I never said that. I fully agree with you that if you try to 100% subsidize, obviously it's nobody's business at the end of the day. So it will never survive, and there is no sustainability. But what I meant was that probably for a while, if you are looking at inclusive access and particularly the lowest income groups, you need to have subsidy, whether we like it or not, for some time to come. At least at for the initial costs. And that cannot be, and you can see even in a place like Sri Lanka, where electrification is almost 100%. We reached the last 2 percentage points because of that kind of subsidies coming in for household wiring, connection costs to cover that kind of, which will be more elaborately explained, I'm sure, in another panel discussion. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to share a brief thing from the JFPR experience we had in Sri Lanka. Mr. Davaneshwaran can speak better, but very briefly that even when you try to do targeted subsidies for connection costs, which the JFPR did in Ampara district, and there was a limited number, you can only give subsidy to so many people. And we did have a fairly elaborate system for identifying households for that upfront cost subsidy, but no matter what method you select, there are a huge number of people that are unhappy at the end of the day. So who feel they've been wronged in not being selected for that subsidy. So what I'm trying to say is that no matter what method you select, it's a very, very complex process, and so we really have to see it in the context of need to balance it whether it's really worth the complexity at all or not. May I reply on access to finance that Purushottam raised? Access to finance for energy services is there in many forms. I mean, India has for LPG now for the below poverty line households there is a connection. There's also been subsidies on connection costs. What Energy has been working on in several countries, mainly in the off-grid space, is subsidies for the entrepreneurs that are selling energy services, and through loan guarantee funds, through the mechanism that Sheila mentioned, that you tie up with an MFI to buy down the interest rate so that the entrepreneur gets a subsidy, doesn't get a subsidy but get concessional loan for operation, and then part of it they often even pass on to other consumers. Another model we've tried in Indonesia is 30-day concession rates. Again, very, very similar. The program extends 30-day concession to the entrepreneur, then who then pass on that benefit to the consumers. So there are alternative, I think, a large number of methods, and something will work somewhere, something else will work somewhere. But there has been a fair amount of experience, and I think by and large positive experience. So it's a question of really fitting the solution to the local context.
Thank you. With that, I think we'll bring this session to a close. Thank you all very much for your patience, and please let's show appreciation